Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, guys. I'm going to record this so I can post it later. Welcome back. Let's see here. Hope everyone's doing okay. Hope your first week online was as stressless as it could be. I'm sure it was somewhat stressful for us all. We'll get through it. Wanted to just show you one thing before I answer a couple questions here, which is I'm sharing my screen now. If you go to our Blackboard page, I have updated a couple things. I tried to update the course calendar so that it would actually show like class meetings and due dates and things like that. And so if you go to the video lectures tab, there's only this one tab now, and instead I've sort of made the lectures assignments. So it says it's over here in the assignments tab. That way it'll show up in the calendar. So it's just a little bit different layout. And I also updated the syllabus. That was the real thing I wanted to show you was if you go to syllabus, or it's also in course documents, I've got the updated syllabus here. And in particular, I've just adjusted the weights a little bit, where I've got the old weights that were right here, but since we're not going to be having any more quizzes, I wanted to decrease the quiz a little bit. So the quiz went from 15 to 10, and I've just shifted that over to, what did I shift that to? Oh, and then we're only going to have, one test in the final. So I decreased the test grade and I decreased the quiz grade, and I shifted that over to the final, since that's the other test we'll have, and the homework. And so the homework is now worth a higher percentage of the grade, and I hope that's actually helpful. It should be helpful because there's no reason you can't get 100 on this online homework if you just start early enough and you ask questions in these help sessions and things like that. You should really be able to get 100. So I'm kind of hoping that helps a little bit. And I think I mentioned this last time, maybe I didn't, but I'd really like to see everyone pass the final exam to pass the course. Now that, I'm not sort of trying to be, I've been getting a little bit of pushback from that from some of my other classes. The reason I'm trying to do that is because we're going to have fewer assessments. We're having, 3+ fewer quizzes. We're having at least 1 fewer test. And it's mostly shifting towards online homework is what's going to take a lot of the weight. And online homework is something that you could potentially get answers to without really learning the material. So that's not the point of online homework, right? Online homework, the point is to practice the material and get good at it so you can do well on a test. And so I would just like to, sort of encourage people to really learn the material and take this seriously. And so I'm hoping by, asking you pass the final to pass the course, that you'll be able to do that. If anyone has a serious issue, I'm happy to sort of reconsider that policy, but I'd like to sort of stick with that for right now. I was going to say something else. What was I going to just mention in addition to that? I feel like if you're just doing what you need to do and you're putting forth effort for the course, that shouldn't be asking that much, I guess, is sort of what I'm thinking. I think that's all I wanted to show you with respect to these things. There's 2 homework assignments due on Wednesday. I've seen about half the classes started those, about half have not. It's really helpful if you at least take a look at the homework before coming to these sessions so that you can ask questions about them. Thank you for those who have asked questions. And then the video for today was on 2.3, which is technically due next Tuesday or next Wednesday. But we can start looking at that homework today. Okay, I'm going to stop presenting my screen. Can I clarify anything about what I've just said? Or did you all see the email about the new pass-fail policy? Would you like me to go into detail about that, or are there questions about that at all? I'm gonna let you guys ask questions right now.
Who sent the email about the pass-fail policy?
I think maybe the president. It was either president or the provost. I don't get the student emails. Can someone confirm where that email came from? I know the provost sent one last week, but it went through officially last Friday. And someone in my previous class said, Sydney has said the provost sent an email about that. Today? Was it today, Sydney, or anyone? In case someone's looking for it in their email. So that's, the provost is Alberto Cardea. And maybe just while people are maybe looking for that email, I'll just explain really quick. The deal is you can take any applicable class, pass, fail, if you want. And so most classes are going to be applicable. The reason a class might not apply is if you need a specific GPA or a specific grade in that class to move on. So you can imagine like some programs might say, you need at least a 2.0 in linear algebra to take this class or something like that. So if you have that situation, you would need to take the class for a grade. If you are interested in the class impacting your GPA, you would want to take it for a grade. So for example, if you think you're going to get an A in linear algebra or any other class, you should just take it for a grade because then it'll help your GPA. If you decide you want to take it pass-fail, what that means is instructors, I wouldn't know who takes it pass-fail. I just grade the course like I normally grade it. I enter grades like I normally grade it. I enter 0.4.0, and then if you decide to take a pass-fail, that email is sent on March 27th, Sydney saying if you guys are looking for it. So that was last week. There'll probably be a more official one coming out this week. Anyway, if you decide to take the class pass-fail, if you get more than a 1.0, like if I submit a final grade of more than 1.0, you would just get a pass. And what that means is you would get 3 credits for the course. It would say you took linear algebra on your transcript, but there wouldn't be an impact on your GPA. Even if you failed the course and you took it pass-fail, there would be no impact on your GPA. So that's sort of the situation. Are there questions about that policy? I'm happy to talk to you about your specific situation, but are there sort of general questions about that? Does it look bad if you do it pass-fail? So it depends. It could potentially, so basically, if you're thinking about maybe going to graduate school, or if you're in the math major, like I would recommend taking it for a grade, especially going to grad school part. And so, but if you're like taking this course as, I don't know, computer science major, and maybe it doesn't matter as much because your course is really, the courses that matter to you are the computer science major courses, then maybe you would want to do it pass-fail. But again, like if this class is going to help your GPA, you might as well take it for a grade. The other thing is you have until the end of the semester to decide. And so the semester's been extended to March 13th. And so there's not going to be a final exam period. It's just going to be like last day is March 13th. And I believe you have until that day to decide whether or not you want to take it pass-fail. And so you could just wait until, for example, after the first test and then see how you do and how you like this online thing to decide if you wanted to. What were you going to say? I think it was Finton who was talking.
I think you mean May 13th, not March 13th.
Sorry, May 13th. Yes, the last day of the semester. March. Sorry, just did it again. May 13th. And so you might, I'm happy to talk about specific people's like situations, maybe one-on-one if you want to talk about like, should I do it specifically? But again, you have some time to think about it, and you don't have to, decide right away. But are there other questions about it right now? Okay. So the video for today, let me just sort of mention the notes, and then we can talk about a few questions. And I'd sort of like to see if there are questions about the notes before we talk about the homework. And so let me switch over to my doc cam here. The notes, the video for today was for section 2.3, which is a great section. It's a section that you should carry with you after you leave linear algebra. Like this is a section when I'm in my advanced courses and we want to sort of review linear algebra, we talk about this theorem first, because this is the thing that ties everything we've done together so far. And so, and we keep adding to this theorem. And so the idea is like for square matrices, all of the things in this list, and we'll add several more before the end of the course, are all equivalent, which means that they're all true or they're all false. And it's kind of cool because they're all tied to each other in some sense, right? Like when you know one thing's true, you know a whole bunch of other things about a matrix or a linear transformation or something like that. And so these are I think they're kind of like fun problems, but they can also be a little bit tricky because there's not like a straight algorithm or method to follow. You have to kind of be, you have to think on your feet and sort of have a good understanding about how all this stuff is connected. And so what I tried to do in this section was present the theorem, sort of give you an idea of how they're tied together by sort of saying, oh, well, A implies K and J, and and also L, and D will imply these, and this, and sort of give you an idea of why they're tied together. And if you're going to grad school too, this is a great theorem. This is a really, really useful theorem. And it's the kind of theorem that I think gives you a good understanding about whether or not you really understand what's going on in the course. If this stuff makes sense, if you can see how these things are all tied to each other, then I think you have a good understanding of about linear algebra. And if it's a little bit tricky, that just means like, okay, well, I need to focus on this section, and this is the part that's confusing. And so these are the types of problems that you see from it. You're usually saying like you're given like one piece of information about a matrix, for example. You need to figure out which one of these things it's telling you, whether it's telling you it's true or false. And then that tells you lots of other things, and then you can answer other questions about it. So that's sort of like the general idea behind the section. And I was able to find, you could imagine this is kind of a tough section to find online homework for. This is a good like short answer kind of section. And so I was actually pleased with some of the homework questions I was able to find. But for examples of the types of questions you might see on tests and quizzes, you should look at my example quizzes and also the homework from the textbook, which is on Blackboard, which I posted. Okay, so can I answer some specific questions about the notes at all? Is there anything in the notes that you want to talk about before we look at some of those homework questions? I have a question from 2.1 and also from 2.3 in this section that people emailed me about. Were there questions about the notes? I'm going to pause and see if anyone says anything. Feel free to unmute or talk in the chat. While you're thinking as well, I'll mention I graded the 1.9 homework, and those solutions are posted to Blackboard as well. I put some comments on them sometimes. I'm not sure if how you're able to access those comments, but just be aware that if you lost points or something, I usually try to correct you about how you lost points. Okay, questions about the notes at all before we look? Will we have to memorize the IMT? Yes, this is a huge important theorem that should be, as I like to say in my review sheets, it should be tattooed somewhere on your body by the time test time comes. And thinking about how all these things are equivalent. So the memorization process shouldn't be memorize a whole bunch of things and jam it into your head. It should be thinking about how all these things are connected. Once you think about how they're connected, that sort of process helps you internalize it, which is a form of memorizing it. But the short answer to your question is yes, you need to know these things and how they're all connected to each other. Other questions about the notes specifically? Past sections, you're welcome to ask questions about as well before we look at some homework. I'll just remind you once again, I posted all the old homework, all the written homework solutions on Blackboard if you ever want to ask questions about those as well. Was someone about to ask something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So for Theorem 9, I'm kind of confused as for its application.
Theorem 9. Yeah, so the last page of these notes.
Mm-hmm. To my understanding, it states that if you multiply the original matrix with its inverse, which creates the identity matrix, with your input vector, yeah, it is equivalent to the inverse times the matrix, not the matrix, the vector b. When would we ever use that? And I might just not understand what exactly it's used for.
Sure, yeah. So this is I wouldn't expect to see like a question specifically about this theorem, but let me just sort of explain what it's saying here. We know that linear transformations can be written as a matrix. That's something we learned in the linear so one of the things this page and this theorem's doing is kind of tying together some of the past sections is what we're doing here. And so what we had seen in the past section was linear transformations can be written as a matrix via matrix multiplication. And something we know about inverse functions is inverses send the output back to the input. That's just like a general thing about inverses, which is what it's being sort of says right here. And all this theorem is saying is the inverse function of a linear transformation that would return the range to the domain is actually going to be given by the inverse of the matrix, which maybe seems obvious because if A, represents the matrix, then okay, the inverse should represent the inverse. But this is just sort of stating it exactly. And what I've sort of shown right down here is like, okay, we can represent the matrix, the linear transformation as a matrix. And so that matrix is going to send things to the vector B. And look, when we multiply by the inverse, it sends that B back to the matrix it came from. So just sort of showing you that instead of having an input-output thing here, we have an output-input thing. So it's sending output back to the input. So this is technically input right here, and this would be, or B would be the output. And so we're taking the output B, multiplying by the inverse, and sending it back to the input is what this theorem's showing. And it's saying, moreover, that inverse is going to be the inverse of the matrix A. Does that clarify it? And so that, again, I wouldn't ask types of problems about this. It's just kind of tying together matrix inverses with linear transformations is sort of the idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions about the notes? Again, I'm just sort of trying to clarify note things before we look at some homework problems. Okay. Feel free to ask another question later, but I'm going to switch over to a homework question about this section first. So sorry, Finton, I know we were talking about 2-1 a second ago, but we were just talking about this section, so I think it makes sense to look at this homework problem first. So this is a section, this is due next Wednesday, but obviously people have started looking at the homework because that's the section that's due today, or that's the section we looked at today, so this is great. So most people may not have looked at this homework yet, but I hope it can help illustrate the value of the theorem here. And so again, this is section 2.3, problem number 4. So first, it just kind of lists the invertible matrix theorem, and it's the same thing that's listed, I just showed a second ago, maybe rearranged, I'm not really sure, maybe rephrased a little bit, but the same things are all there. And so, I know this is kind of hard to see, but here's the thing you're given. Let me zoom in on it. You're given that this is true, and then it's asking us, let me pull the question up. I have a hard time reading it here. So the options to choose on the first one are true and false. Oh, it's saying, so this is saying if this happens for square matrices, then the transpose of Q is invertible. And so the answer is this is true or false. And then, so right here, you choose true or false. And then down here, it's trying to figure out what part of the above statement does this relate to. And so let me sort of just rewrite what it's saying there. And let's go through this thing together. So the thing we're being told is this. I know it's focusing, but let it focus, and then I'm just rewriting the problem. Okay, so we're being told this is true, and all these things are matrices. So M, N, Q, and B are just matrices. And so the question is, if this is true, then QT is invertible? Question mark. So the answer is like a true false question. Can everyone see that okay now that I've rewritten it and restated it? The question is about what the question is. I know it's a little bit funky, and I sort of like thought about, do I want to add this one? It's a little bit funky, but I actually think it's kind of a good question here. And so I put a hint in here. I said, first simplify B inverse. And so what is B times B inverse?
The identity matrix.
The identity matrix, nice. And so we're multiplying this thing right here times Q, and we get the identity matrix. And then I put in my hint as well that M plus 2N is a matrix itself. And so we could call this some other matrix. Let's just call it like A. And so what we've shown here is some matrix A times Q is the identity matrix. This is really the relationship we're being given. And so this looks a lot like, say, these two things right here, right? We're multiplying two matrices and we get the identity matrix. And so that means the matrices we're multiplying are invertible because we're multiplying them together and getting the identity, right? So this relationship implies that A is the inverse of Q. In other words, Q is invertible. And if we know Q is invertible, then in the invertible matrix, in the inverse section, we have something that says the transpose is also invertible. And so the thing you're given here is just to try to make you realize that Q is invertible, which means the transpose is invertible. And so is the transpose invertible? True. And it's trying to get us to figure out which part of the theorem it relates to. And it relates to, let's see, is it part J or part K? It refers to part J. And so this would be like, if J is true, yeah. So it's like, if J is true, you have to figure this part out when you're looking at it, but it says, if J is true, then that means L is true. That's what you would put in right here. So if you haven't looked at these problems yet, this is going to sound really confusing, but maybe when you do, go back and I'm going to post this video to YouTube, and so you can go back and rewatch this and see if you can make some sense of it. There's 4 or 5 questions very similar to this one. They have a very similar structure. So was it Sydney who asked about this one? I can't remember who asked about this one, but does that help whoever asked that one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. You also asked that one. Cool. Are there other questions in 2.3? The other question I had that someone sent me was this one from 2.1. A couple people asked about this one, which we can look at in a second. But are there other questions from 2.3 now, just because we're on that topic? Actually, before we get too far as well, can we decide on test 1? Did people see my email? I should have mentioned that earlier. So I'd like to do test 1, which will be like a remote proctored thing. I'll email you the test and I'll watch you take it online here, kind of like we're doing right now, except your videos will be on and whatever. And I was thinking about doing it maybe either, there was concern that we don't want to push it off too far because you'll be forgetting this stuff. And people had already wanted to do it. And we've been in a world of hurt. So would you like to do it like really soon and like do it next week and have it only be on chapter 1? Or would you rather like wait a couple weeks, maybe add a couple more sections to it from chapter 2, which will be a little more to study, but in my opinion, the stuff from chapter 2, the early stuff at least, 2.1 and 2.2 is like, might just like pad your grade in some sense. So is there a preference?
I'd rather add on to the test.
So some people want to do test 2. I've heard 3 votes for test 2.
I think test 2 may actually be beneficial, but if I think the main reason I want to do test 2 though is give myself an opportunity to actually get a webcam, because at the moment I kind of don't have one.
Okay, well we can work out specific issues like that.
Oh, okay.
And I think you could potentially use a phone or things like that for this kind of stuff. But anyway, we can work out specific issues. So don't let like technology be the thing that's stopping you. I'd be more interested in just like general preferences about studying or your schedules or, things like that.
If that's the case, I think I'd rather do it earlier.
So that's 1 vote for earlier. I think maybe 2 or 3 for later.
I'll do it later, I guess.
Earlier for me.
Would you mind if you're going to answer, just throwing it in the chat, just so I can count them up later? A couple people said it verbally, that just if you wouldn't mind throwing it in there. So there seems to be a decent mix. The IMT would not be something on this test if we did it later, just to be clear. It would sort of be 2.1, which is like adding and multiplying matrices, I guess multiplying them. And then it would be matrix inverses, which I think is somewhat easy to do. So I wouldn't do 2.3 on it. Okay, it seems like there's a decent vote for later. And so that's sort of what I'm thinking right now. We might do it on the 15th. I've already posted stuff from chapter 1 I'll add the chapter 2.1 and 2.2 review to Blackboard. I've already got it pulled up. I was just looking at it before class. So I will do that. It looks like there's enough votes probably to make it the later one. Yeah. So, and if you got issues, if you want to talk about how that's going to work for you, I'm happy to do that. Okay. Other questions about 2.3 before we look at this one? And Finton, do you want to go ahead and take over and share your screen? Finton and I were talking about this one. He's one of the people asked about this particular question. So this is 2.1, problem 11, where you're asked to multiply some given matrix times some unknown matrix. So like maybe this is A, B, C, D or something, and get the zero matrix. And so Finton and I were talking about ways to do this one, and he had written up something on his screen. I believe he would going to share with us. So Finton's going to share a screen. You guys should look at his screen.
Okay, just give me a sec, and so I've just been kind of set in the meantime. I'm presenting. All right, I'm presenting. Do you all see this screen? This paint.
I can see it. Yeah.
All right. So what I tried to do, our goal here is to find something here that when multiplied by this equals the zero matrix. That's not the zero matrix. So my approach to this, or my attempted approach to this, because I didn't actually have figuring out this problem, was I thought, all right, because this would get multiplied with this, and this gets multiplied with, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but because this gets multiplied with this, and this gets multiplied with this, and the same thing with this getting multiplied with this, and this getting multiplied with this, I thought it would make sense to put these in a sort of augmented matrix, since this multiplies down and this multiplies down the same way that it would in here.
So that looks good. That seems good, but the solution doesn't seem. Are there questions about the process first? Then I have a question about what he's trying to do. He's trying to set up like the matrix he's given times some arbitrary matrix, and he wants it to equal 0, 0, 0, 0. And so then he's doing the first row of the first row times the first column and setting that up, and he wants that to be the first column of the answer, which is 0, 0. And so that would be x1, x2. But then when you solve that, it would be x1, x2 is x. First of all, it's x2 is a free variable, all right, not x3.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a.
And then it would be x1 is 9/7 x2.
Oh, that's why. That's the mistake that I made. Okay.
And so what your real answer is x2 is x2. Would you mind just writing that too? And so then you just pick a value for x2.
Yeah, so x2 equals x2. And then I imagine if I wanted to do just like 9/7 up here, I would do like a 1, 1 down here, because 1 times 9/7 is 9/7.
I'm sorry, I was half thinking about something else and listening to my dog bark in the background. Can you say that one more time?
So would a potential answer be this? Forgive my handwriting. I'm kind of trying to write on the screen. That.
So you've only solved for x1, x2 though, right? So you need to do the same thing again to solve for x3 and x4.
Wouldn't it be the exact same augmented matrix though?
Yes. Okay, so then the other solution then is x3 equals 9/7 x4. So then x3 acts the same as x1. So when you pick
and
something,
and x4 acts the same as x2.
Right. So right now you have.
Let me just try to plug this into work.
See if that happen. That does look good. Let's see if that works.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's the right answer.
I'm sorry?
I think that's the right answer. I got something like very similar for mine. I had different numbers.
Okay,
like a
that's
lot
right.
easier numbers, but
Cool. Okay, that looks good. That's not exactly, I mean, that is a very good way to approach it, and actually it's a little more direct than the way I would have thought about it personally. And so let me just sort of do it a similar way, but a little bit different as well. So I'm going to, if people would look back at my screen here, the way I thought about approaching that is to do it a little more less directly, I guess is the way to think about it. So I would have done this, sort of set it up in the same way. And then you want this to equal 0, 0, 0, 0, right? And so then when you do like the first row, for example, let me set up this, oops. Let me set this up like this, I guess. So like the upper left-hand corner is going to be 7a minus 9c. And you want that to be 0. Right? And then the upper right-hand corner is going to be 7b minus 9d. And you want that to be 0. And I would get something in each quadrant, like minus 28a plus 36b equals 0. And then the same thing here, which is, again, it's a similar, you're eventually doing the same thing that you just did. But when I do it like this is now 4 equations. And so then you could just put it into like a big matrix and you get the same answer. You get like a similar thing, but this would just be, you could do it like in one, I don't know. This is the way I was thinking about it, I guess. It would be like 7 minus 9, 0. 7 minus 9, 0. Minus 28, 36, 0. Minus 28, 36, 0. Again, you're doing the same thing, just maybe in a little bit different. And when you reduced it, you would end up with the same kind of answer. But just thinking about it in terms of like 4 equations instead of 2 separate things. But similar approach. Either one's fine.
The numbers on mine were so easy. I was just able to eyeball it and figure out what they would be. Like what I would multiply by.
So is it different than the one we're looking at now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone gets one that's generated differently. So you might have to do your own problem for this one. I was happy to find this one, though. I actually asked a similar question in the written homework, and so I was really happy to see a similar one in the online one. That's the weird things I get excited about, I guess. Are there thoughts about this one? Can I clarify something about that? I don't know if that's confusing. So this is from the homework that's due on this Wednesday. So 2.2, 2.1, and 2.2 are now, everything's online, right? All the homework is online. And it's due Wednesday night at midnight. Maybe I know I forgot that this is the first week that we're doing something new. So if that's not clear, if anyone hasn't looked at that homework yet, you should do that soon. Because then on Wednesday, if you have questions about what's due on Wednesday night, be a good time to ask questions about it, excuse me. Just trying to see if anyone, how many people have looked at this stuff. Yeah, so again, about half the class has like already done the homework, and it looks like about half the class hasn't started. So if you're in the haven't started boat, take a look at it before Wednesday so that on Wednesday we can ask some questions about it. Okay, are there other homework questions, other things you guys want to talk about? If not, I am going to stop recording. I will remind